background, I was born and raised in California and grew up in Bishop, if anybody knows where Bishop is. And married my husband, met him in '86, married him in '88, so we're going on 30 years in March. Wow. And the biggest thing that changed in my life was when I was about 35, 40 years old, so this was 1997, I had what I call a God experience. Literally met me in my business office. And I had a spiritual awakening, even though I had been brought up in a church setting. I had walked completely away from God. I was in a spiritual realm, New Age type of belief system. And in this particular moment, my higher power, who I will call the creator of the universe, met me where I was at, and I rededicated my life to the Lord. I didn't know at the time that my husband had the same type of experience. We did not talk about it for about 4 months. And it wasn't until I announced that I wanted to be baptized in a church that he revealed what had happened with him when we were baptized together. At that time, God immediately called us into ministry. We became pastors, doing youth groups initially at Southwest Community Church. For those of you that are from the valley here, you'll know that church. And quickly were called to do even further ministry into adult ministry. And in 2003, several people asked us, after Southwest had some changes that took place, asked us to head up a church. And so we started Faith Community Church with those people and did ministry there for 14 years. So during that 14-year period of time, I encountered numerous people that wanted help. They wanted to know, they needed marriage counseling. They needed to know, how do I deal with this issue? And I had a lot of opinions, but I had no education. So I felt like God called me to go back to school. I went to Loyola University, got my bachelor's, then I transitioned to Capella University, got my master's degree, and at the end of my master's degree, I felt very clearly that God said, get your PhD. Didn't know what I was going to do with them, but I knew God was telling me to do it. You're going to ask me how I knew it was God. If you ever hear God's voice, you know it's God. It's something that's completely outside of yourself. Anyway, got my PhD in 2016. Been with Sovereign Health since 2014, so Sovereign was part of my journey with that degree system. But the biggest thing that I know is that God wants me to help people unpack their baggage, their emotional, psychological, and spiritual baggage that keeps them from experiencing life to its fullest. So that's where Unpacking Your Bags came from. It was a total God story, totally God-given. And I hope that somehow through this presentation, you gain some wisdom and insight as to your journey and maybe journey of the patients or people that are in your life that you can help. There we go. So objectives for this course. Aiding people in identifying spiritual resources to be used in recovery. I think this one here, which Yvette will like, where are you at, Yvette? The importance of step 1. It was through conversations with Yvette that I incorporated this in. How steps 2, 3, 6, 7 of the 12-step model can be incorporated and used with DBT, which is dialectical behavioral therapy, and I'll go into that pretty thoroughly. And how steps 7, 8, 9, and 10 of the 12 steps can be used to unpack emotional baggage and lead to healing from mental health and addiction issues. We are not just using the 12 steps for the addiction model, we are using it for emotional recovery. As I said, this is a Christian approach. I'm not discounting any other spiritual belief system. If you say your higher power is the tree, or is Muslim, or is Hindu, I'm not discounting that. I'm speaking from my heart, from my religious experiences, my Christian experiences. I'm not really talking about religion at all. This is spiritual practices that we incorporate into our daily life. So I just want to put that disclaimer there in the very beginning, as to hopefully not offend anybody as I go through the presentation. My resources here, my references, the 12-step model, of course, dialectical behavioral therapy, Spiritual practices. Beth Moore, if any of you know of Beth Moore in the ministry field for Christian ministries, she did a book that changed my life called Getting Out of the Pit was the name of the book. Love that book. It goes into a lot of brain chemistry, and it's a very good resource for recovery. Life Cycles Completed. I use a lot of Erik Erikson's Stages of Change. And Stages of Change by Petroska. And then the new concept that's my new passion, which is epigenetics. And I'll go into that just briefly, but it's really, really exciting, and I encourage you after this presentation to look it up on YouTube, because I was really excited when I heard the term, and I'll explain a little bit more about that as I go on too. So where does baggage come from? Well, as I said in the beginning, 12 steps is not just for recovery. 12 steps is kind of a life practice, and I think that it's an important life practice. We collect emotional and psychological issues throughout our life. And I think the 12 steps, if we embrace God, higher power, recognize that oftentimes we are completely powerless over those situations. There can be healing. We can get rid of that baggage. It's an unpacking process, but we can get rid of it. So Erikson's stages. Any of you from the psychology field and know about Erik Erikson? Yep, there we go. So he has 8 stages. I've incorporated stage 3, 4, 5, and 6. There are 2 other stages after this. But I think these stages are important to recognize, because these are the stages where we really are affected in our life and where that baggage starts coming from. So let's look at, this is stage number 3. He has identified basic virtues, and the basic virtue with this stage is purpose. So you have a person that's raised with an authoritarian parent. Authoritarian parents are very directive and in charge and pushy and shovey, and so the kid really doesn't even know what to do. They become irritable, they become frustrated, and so everything in their life, they don't seem to be able to develop a sense of purpose. Or you have the person that has learned that no matter what they do, they're always going to need to feel guilty about something. So everything is wrong, and I take on the ownership of guilt. So what happens? We have baggage of guilt that develops. Okay, industry and inferiority, ages 5 to 12. What was it like in your life between the ages of 5 and 12? What sort of pinnacle thing happened for you? For me, almost everything happened when I was 6 or 7 years old. So that, to me, is a very important stage. Competency, you become competent. You learn to ride bicycles. You learn to manage and navigate relationships. You learn to trust others. So you have a person that fails at mastery of trust, autonomy, and industrious skills during this time, and they become ashamed of themselves because there's such a competition between peers and others that are in their lives. So they often feel defeated or inferior, right? So the baggage, shame, and inferiority. I should probably stay over here so I can click the button. Next stage, 13 to 19. So what I think is fascinating about this particular stage is identity and role confusion. With our LGBT community, this is the biggest age for actually identifying that I am not a straight person. I am not living in a straight, I'm living in a straight world, but I'm not identifying with it. I have desires, urges, feelings that are contrary to this quote-unquote normal society. And you'll see that when we look at statistics, this is the age range when young people start coming out and saying, I'm bisexual, I'm gay, and they are really identifying with their sexuality. So a person in this stage begins to firmly identify his or her role in society, as well as career choices that are made. Sexual identity is formed. And when this stage is hindered, the person's role in society can be malformed. Low self-esteem, identity crisis. Who am I? Why am I here? What am I doing? On top of all the peer pressure of, you need to become a doctor, you need to become a lawyer, you need to go to school, you need to, all these pressures that our kids experience in life. We think, oh, those are normal pressures. But there's so much that's put on children that if this is malformed, that fidelity, which is that basic virtue, it doesn't happen. They don't have that independence, and they don't understand that they have a self-worth, they have some importance. And then finally, in this particular stage, 20 to 39, again, this is not the final stage, but I think from a change perspective with baggage forming, it's probably the end of where baggage starts forming. If they have had any of the issues in the previous stages, intimacy and isolation starts happening. And the basic virtue is love. We all need love. So a person in this stage of intimate relationships, if they're not formed properly, the person starts isolating. We see depression. We see lack of self-worth, suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, substance use. It increases and increases and increases. It started maybe the stage before, but it gets worse and worse and worse and intensifies. So they might have a long history starting with depression, anxiety, bipolar depression, even schizophrenia. When we think about schizophrenic diagnoses in males, it's usually right at around age 20 that they start showing symptoms. Theorists also believe that if a person begins using substances at any of these stages, they get stuck psychologically and emotionally in that stage. So we have to help them unpack that baggage and move on into the next psychosocial stage in order to firmly and formally develop. And you start seeing change. If you've gone through recovery, if you know people in recovery, once they get that recovery embraced, you start seeing the maturation through the stages occurring. What I think is important is we look at the brain. I've circled on here the frontal lobe. And I think the frontal lobe is probably the most important aspect of the brain when it comes to spirituality and recovery. That's where all of our emotions are at. And it's the most affected by substance use disorders. We have programs that focus on maturity. I was asked to talk a little bit about these. Sovereign Health, as Bo had said, has two programs that are geared towards the 40-plus male and female population. And those particular programs are PRIME, which is Primary Recovery Incorporating Men's Experiences, and POWER, Primary Opportunities for Women Experiencing Recovery. We love acronyms in this day and age. So these particular programs use Erickson's theory of stage change, as well as utilizing the concepts of the 12-step model. So the entire curriculum is based upon Erickson's stages, incorporating and embracing the 12-step model. So if you have anybody that is in recovery, that needs a mature recovery program, we make sure that our population that is in this program, not only are they 40 and older, but the primary, no pun on the prime, but the primary criteria is businessmen and women that maybe are at jeopardy of losing family, friends, jobs, all of their finances. We have many business owners that come into the program, and it's a real true community. The people that are in this program really truly are embracing their recovery because this is like their last chance. They're 40 years old, they have a history, and this is it. So looking at the frontal lobe again, spiritual practices, like I said. When we talk about spiritual practices, the part of the brain that's most affected and shows most highlighting is the frontal lobe. This was the most fascinating aspect of that, though, that I saw. When we have a baseline individual, and this was the brain of a monk, okay? Baseline, you see all the red and the yellow and all that stuff and how what's connected, what's not. And then that person goes into a meditative state. They're praying, they're focusing on their spiritual practices, and they're relaxing, they're going into that calming place. Look how everything is connected. The whole brain is functioning more thoroughly, more effectively. And that's part of why I believe spiritual practices incorporated into recovery, whether it's mental health or addiction, are very, very pinnacle. Which takes me to our other program, which Bo mentioned, which is CROSS, Christian Recovery Offering Significant Success. Again, when we talk about recovery, we're not just talking about substance abuse, we're talking about holistic recovery, mental health and addiction, incorporated in the same thing. This particular program has no age specificity. 18 and older is the age criteria. But the big thing is that the person has to either be open to Christian practices or want Christian practices incorporated into their recovery program. The entire curriculum is based upon Erickson's theory of stages as well as Fowler's stages of religious change. So that's how the curriculum was developed, and so far it's pretty much our most successful program here at Sovereign. So here's some questions. If the same areas of the brain are affected, can spiritual practices replace the desire for substances? If there is more brain functioning, how does that present as change? If your brain's working more, what's the difference, right? So let's take a look at my new favorite word, epigenetics. Epigenetics is actually something that was developed in the 60s. Erickson used it in his documents as far as his stages of psychosocial development is concerned. But what I think is the most fascinating is that epigenetics shows and documents that everything that you and I do affects our genetics. Our DNA actually changes when we do things. You just ate dinner. Your DNA is affected by what you ate. Myself, I enjoy a good meal. I enjoy a good glass of wine. My DNA changes when I eat and drink substances. So think about our patients. Think about the people that are in recovery, mental health as well as addiction. How are their genetics modified through the use of substances, through the inappropriate behaviors, the malpracticing behaviors that they have formed over the years as coping mechanisms, right? We have anger outbursts. Well, it's my coping mechanism. Well, your DNA has changed as a result of that coping mechanism. But if we learn to unpack the baggage associated with that, change happens and we can actually reverse our DNA. So inheritance and mechanisms other than through the DNA sequence of genes is what epigenetics is about, and the characteristics that pass from a cell to its daughter cell in cell division and to traits of the whole organism. We already know that RNA, DNA, RNA, affects memory. DNA affects everything about you. Part of the epigenetics, really interesting studies have been done. If you took a twin study and you separated the twins at birth, and one twin lived a completely different life than the other twin, you put them back together at the end of the study, let's say at age 50, they would look nothing alike and they would have no behaviors that were even remotely similar. They might even have, like one might be fat and one might be skinny type of thing. It's a complete change in impacting that genetic makeup. It doesn't completely change the genes, but it definitely changes the DNA process. So now let's look at dialectic behavioral therapy, which, again, is change, right? So dialectical behavioral therapy is a therapy that is designed to help people who are suffering from mood disorders, as well as those who need to change patterns of behavior that are not helpful, such as harmful self-harm, suicidal ideation, and substance abuse. It's combined with cognitive behavioral therapy techniques for emotional regulation and reality testing with concepts of distress tolerance, acceptance, and mindfulness awareness. And I think the two things that are the most important is the acceptance part, as we'll see as we go through this. Dialectic means balance. It's all about balance in our life. We hear that all of the time. You know, you're stressed out about work issues or things, something's going on at home. Well, if you have a balance, everything kind of, you know, homeostasis. That's what it's all about, right? So two things can't happen at the same time. I can't be happy and sad at the same time. I can't be anxious and relaxed at the same time. It's reciprocal inhibition. It's the way our bodies work. Two things don't go together at the same time. So, how DBT works. Well, it increases distress tolerance. So we develop skills so that we can take on more and more distressing situations. We learn to cope. Anger management skills. We learn to embrace being calm, mindfulness practices, which I call prayer. And it's a welcoming of radical acceptance, the balance between change, I have to change this behavior, and acceptance of who I have been up until now and what I will become. So distress tolerance. One of the things that is essential in changing the way we feel is movement, exercise. Ah, love that word, exercise, yuck. But endorphins are the most powerful change mechanism we embrace, and everybody has them, everybody can do them. You know, literally, I have some patients that I just say, let's just do this. Let's just march in place and see what happens. I have really, really aggressive patients. I had a guy that just punched the wall one day, and I said, I want you to give me 10. I made him to get down on the floor, give me 10 push-ups. And when he could do 10, I said, I want 10 more, and I want him slower. Okay? Increasing that endorphin buildup. Change happens when those endorphins are in place. Contributing, giving to others. You're thirsty? Get a glass of water for yourself, get a glass of water for your neighbor. Giving back to others makes a difference. When people are advanced in their program, in recovery, we often get them into volunteering in the community. It helps so much with giving back and learning to control the distress. Sometimes, with the comparing stage, people think, well, if I compare myself to somebody else, I'm just going to feel like I'm worthless or I'm not as good as they are. But comparing isn't comparing, it's observing. It's looking at others. When a person that has anger or anxiety or distress looks at another person that has anger and anxiety and distress from an objective perspective and sees what that other person is doing, they can take that information and they can promote change within themselves, helping them to learn that this is what it looks like to other people. I want to change that, and I'm going to learn to change that by increasing my distress tolerance. And then, again, the opposites don't attract with the emotions. You can't be happy and sad at the same time. Doesn't work. Though, sometimes I can cry and be happy and sad at the same time. Pushing away, stepping back, getting that objective perspective on things. And then sometimes when a person is really, really struggling, severe anxiety, panic attacks, we have to use techniques that we talk about de-escalating strategies. I have them count backwards from 10. I have them focus on, steps, maybe clenching their fists rapidly. Sensations are really big at de-escalation. Rubbing a surface that's soft, smooth, rough, rubbing the carpeting. I have a peer that actually looks at the carpeting and says, "Tell me how many shades of red are in there." And of course the patient's staring at the carpeting saying, "There's no red in that carpet." But it gets their mind off of the anxiety. Embracing mindfulness. So we improve the moment. In recovery, there's usually a safe place identified. So when you're craving something, you think of your safe place. When you're distressed because you're craving something, you think of your safe place. I've had patients that have painted pictures in my mind through description of the most beautiful paradise places. It's very relaxing, right? It's also about thinking about places that are safe, imagining God, imagining being in an angel's arms, imagine Jesus holding your hand. So these type of imagined experiences help, that mindfulness help with the distress. Experience the moment, noticing what's happening in your body. One of the trainings that I went through and what my dissertation was on is post-traumatic stress disorder. And part of what happens in trauma is that our experience becomes part of our physical body, and we lose contact with what's really going on inside of us, and we get triggered by things and we don't understand it. So in the process is identifying a safe place, but also making sure that we are in that moment. So having a patient notice their feet on the floor and the floor is solid. Having them notice the air conditioner in the background. Having them notice the in the microphone, right? So having them notice just different things that takes them out of what's causing them anxiety from their distress to an in the moment, oh my gosh, I'm in a safe place, I'm on solid ground, and there's things going on around me and I'm okay. Prayer and relaxation, I'll talk about that a little more in just a few minutes. Relaxation, muscle reflection. So part of the DBT skills, CBT skills is flex that muscle and then relax it. When we do that, we kind of gain a better sense of ourself. Breathing, having them count their breaths, a breath cycle. Sometimes people hold their breath when they're anxious, so having them do that helps to de-escalate. Walk and breathe. I've had people marching around this room practicing with every step, a breath in, breath out, breath in, breath out. And that counting, that being present and letting that oxygen flow, how it helps with the mindfulness, being present. And then, again, combining a prayer with meditation, so stillness, and being in the moment, and how important that is when we're focusing on recovery. I talked a little bit about already feeling your hands if you're sitting down, noticing the contact that the chair is making with your behind or your legs, your back. I have a little practice that I used to use with Family Weekend, which we have here at Sovereign Health, where I would tell parents, I want you to go back to your hotel room and I want you to brush your teeth tonight with the opposite hand and tell me how easy that is. And most of the time they look at me like I've got two faces, but nobody realizes if my dominant hand is right and I decide to try to brush my teeth with my left hand, I'm going to have to rebrush my teeth with my right hand because I just can't, I don't have the mechanism to do that. And so part of change is learning how difficult even small changes can be in our life. And then accepting reality without judgment. How many times do we say, I wish I had, if I would have, you know, I can't believe I did. And if we take those and we incorporate the changes in our life and don't judge what I did, but accept, admit, and understand what I did, but now I can move forward, and this is what I'm going to change. I'm not going to change it all at one time, because that's too confusing. But I can change this right now, in this moment. I can choose to have a different behavior. So then we look at willingness to change during, as opposed to willfulness. If I'm willful, I put my guard up and I reject help. If I'm willing to accept help, I can make change in my life. And then again, radical acceptance, and that's radical acceptance of what I've done, where I'm at, and where I'm going, and how I want to make changes in my life that can affect every aspect of my being, including my DNA. I have down here forgiving. Huge, huge point. If we can't forgive ourselves, we can't move on, because we will stay trapped in that place of unforgiveness. So in addition to DBT, the best approach to unpacking bags is looking at the 12 steps. Step number one, anybody in the recovery realm knows that admitting that we're powerless over things in our lives. The step says over substances or mental health symptoms, that our lives have become unmanageable. When we're dealing with life circumstances, it feels unmanageable. So accepting and admitting that we have to make a change. We need to get rid of this baggage, get it out of our lives so we can move on, we can be better, we can be what we were created to be. So with change, we look at stages of change from Prochaska. Now, if you have a person that's in pre-contemplation, they're in complete denial that there's anything wrong. You might be able to plant little seeds here and there, but until they recognize that anything's wrong, it's almost like you're wasting air. It's not worth a try. I mean, it's, give it a shot. Because like I said, you're planting seeds, but they're in denial that there's a problem. And so the help that you're extending, make sure you're not working harder than they are. If they're in the contemplative stage, somebody else says it that way, and I really like the way they say it, they're ambivalent. They just don't care, It feels comfortable, change is hard. I don't want to change. They're ambivalent to needing it. I know I probably need it, but who cares? But when they prepare for change, they put on a readiness. They set a goal. I'm going to start right here. And then they take action. And they really start saying, gosh, what do I need to do first? What's the first step? And oftentimes, I've been on many weight loss programs in my life, and I always say, isn't there a magic pill? Can't I just take that pill today and be perfectly skinny tomorrow? With anything in life, change takes work and time and energy. If you try to change it all at one time, you're going to fail. It's one step at a time. Then they get into a maintenance stage, and that's when that new skill kind of starts becoming almost habitual. So I'm starting to do it automatically. That's a really awesome place to be. That I just immediately went into the new skill. I coped appropriately right off the bat, instead of having to stop and think about what I was going to do. And then we have termination, and that's when you don't even have to think about anything anymore. Everything's permanent. I don't know anybody in recovery, whether it's mental health or whether it's addiction, that ever gets to termination stage. Because I think recovery is an ongoing life process. And so even though I sometimes struggle with like NA and AA, having to stand up and introduce themselves as still an addict, it is an ongoing process. And change does happen, but it has to be thought through every single day. I have to choose to take my antidepressant. I have to choose to take my lithium for my bipolar. I have to choose to take my antipsychotic for my schizophrenia. I have to choose to get up and not use the substance that I used to use. Change takes practice. So let's take a look at the action stage. Step 2, 3, and 6. So if we look at the DBT skills, Step 2 is you come to believe that a power greater than yourself can restore you to sanity. That's kind of nice. If your life is unmanageable in stage 1, now I can have sanity, right? So we take action. We have radical acceptance of who we've been, what's happening, and where we're going. Step number 3, we make a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. You know what? This is what I'm doing. I'm living this way. Radical acceptance of change and mindfulness, prayer. Step 6, entirely ready to have God remove all defects of behavior. Unpacking your bags. What do I have that needs to be unpacked? Identifying those things. DBT techniques, therapy, interpersonal effectiveness, emotional regulation, and distress tolerance. Step 7, humbly ask God to remove all shortcomings. Gosh, I just identified things. God, take this away from me. I don't want to deal with it anymore. Prayer, meditation, journaling, write a letter to God. Thought journals. Gosh, I wanted that piece of cake, but I didn't eat it because I knew that it wasn't going to help my blood pressure. And then incorporating those practices into daily life. Being mindfully aware of the stage that I'm in and how I need to change. So beginning the process of unpacking your bags is radical acceptance and distress tolerance. So when we radically accept what we've done, who we are, and we allow God to mold us into what He created us to be, it restores the sanity that was removed from our life with all those shortcomings, with all those things that we went through that we experienced. But how's that happen? Well, step 8, we make a list of all the people that we've harmed, and we become willing to make amends with them. Ouch, I have to admit that I was wrong, and then I have to say I'm sorry. It's a tough place to be. But think about this. Even if you're not, if there's never been a substance in your life that you've been addicted to, and I'm talking anything, food, alcohol, any sort of drug, never had that. How easy is it for you to accept when you're wrong, say I'm sorry, and move on? How easy is it? Kathy says, oh, I do that all the time.
No, I said I'm never wrong.
So the point is we have baggage that we collect throughout our lives, right? We talked about those developmental stages. There's things that have happened. There's things that our parents did. There's things that our teachers said to us. And we stored those away and we packed them away. And that's part of what we pull out. Every time somebody says, you know, oh, you're not pretty enough. You're not smart enough. You know, I went decades thinking that I was the dumbest person in the world because I discovered that I had a learning disorder. I have a reading disorder. I got a PhD. You can overcome anything when you decide to make a change and you decide to move on. Embrace the things that you have and you work through them. You unpack that baggage. You're no longer stupid. I have to work a little harder than everybody else. Step 9. Make direct amends to such people whenever possible, except when it would do injury to them or to others. I had a patient one day, male patient, that was in this step, and he says, I need to tell my wife that I cheated on her. And I said, okay, wait a minute, let's look at step 9. You know, let's pray about this. Because, yeah, honesty is the best policy, but how's that going to affect her? What do we need to do to prepare for this confession? You don't just walk into a room and confess that you had a relationship with somebody else. You have to make preparation for that. So it's one of those things that, yeah, you need to do it, because honesty is really part of this, but it's making sure it's not this blunt, horrific thing that you're saying to a person that it's really going to harm them. So this is what unpacking your bags is all about. And then step 10 is continuing to take personal inventory, and when you wrong people, promptly admit it. So it's that daily every single day. Gosh, I wish I hadn't done that. I need to go up to so-and-so. I have a peer that pretty much daily, gosh, I thought about that last night and I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have said that. Or that might have been inappropriate, I apologize. And I get that because it's important for recovery. It's important for healing. So let's connect the dots. Step 2, 3, 6, and 7. Believe in God, okay? We call him Jesus. Turn your will over to God. Ask God to remove the defects and the shortcomings. And that all requires radical acceptance of what you've done, where you're at, where you're going. Steps 7, 8, 9, and 10. Humbling ourselves, acknowledge our wrongdoings, and making amends, and taking a personal inventory requires a lot of distress tolerance. I get pretty anxious when I take an inventory of all the things that I've done and who I might have harmed in that process. It can be pretty overwhelming. But by doing that, I free myself. I unpack that baggage that has held me captive, that's going to help, that's going to hold me captive in the future. So unpacking your bags. When emotional and psychological baggage is unpacked, true healing takes place, including our DNA changing. In order to unpack our bags, we must radically accept behaviors and events that have occurred, and we must learn to manage the emotions and allow ourselves to feel again. Again, I've had people walk into my office in tears, and they aren't crying because they're not upset because something happened. They're upset because the tears are so overwhelming and they've never allowed themselves to feel before. Allowing ourselves to feel the emotions of unpacking that baggage, of freeing ourselves, is a healing process. I never want to leave without including the last 2 steps, because they're equally as important. So we seek through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. And then finally, having a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps and of incorporating DBT into our lives and of recognizing what stage of change we're in. We try to carry this message to people everywhere because I think it's important for every single person to put change into practice. And that these practices will be, and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. So everything that we do, we incorporate change into it. Consistency, but change. So to wrap it up, how does distress tolerance increase the power of the 12 steps? Well, we learn that through the process, we increase our resiliency to situations. So we learn to tolerate more distress. Mindfulness, prayer, meditation, those aha moments of, oh my gosh, now I see what you were talking about, Yvette, when you said X, Y, Z, right? And then radical acceptance of God. If we can't accept that there's something greater than us, I believe we get lost in that. If there's not something outside of us, then hopelessness can set in. And though I do know that people can count on a higher power and they say it's within themselves, I like to choose to believe that there's a power out there that's outside of me, that's greater than me, that I can count on. Questions? And you're still awake.
How did the fellow who was unfaithful find the right way to approach his wife? What was a good way to approach it?
So that's an interesting question. He actually said, I have some stuff that I need to talk to you about. This is what I've been dealing with. They've been working on their relationship for quite some time. And he talked about his addiction and what had happened through his addiction. And then he said, this was after months of working together as a couple, he said, I have to tell you that I was unfaithful. And I just pray that you'll forgive me, because it wasn't really me, it was my alcohol, but I did do this, and I'm so truly sorry. And because they had worked through couples counseling with his alcoholism, she actually recognized that he was a changed person, and she did forgive him. Anything else? Okay.